I want to thank you all for coming this morning, for being up bright and early, and even those who don't have their videos on and maybe sitting there drinking coffee in their pajamas. I'm saying welcome to you as well. And thank you for being here, and thank you for being, as I said, up bright and early. And before I start the actual slide presentation, I want to also recognize the number of people, primarily women, and thank them for the work that they have done over the years. Without the work of women who have come before us, the generation before, and even early on in the generation that I was in, there were so many women who have worked so hard to get women where they are now. I mean, when you stop and think of it, in my lifetime, women have, taken to the pulpit. Women have been recognized doing things that before my generation was forbidden by the church. I just want to thank those people, as I said, who have come before us, who have done hard work and who continue to do hard work. We're not there yet, but certainly we are getting there. So I am going to go ahead and at least attempt to do my screen share here. And now I seem to have many options. So we're going to go to that and see what happens. You may have to bear with me a moment. Can you all see that from your standpoint? Can you see the first slide, those of you at home?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so the first part of this, the first slide, if you will, is, hey girl, what's your problem? And the reason that I chose this sort of as the title for this class is I have a 26-year-old granddaughter, and when she comes into the room, she's always going, hey girl. I mean, that's the thing if you're 27 or 26, but we have problems. I mean, we're not without problems, and we are going to talk about those. And my hope is that this becomes a discussion, not a presentation. I really want that to be part of what we're doing. And I'm very pleased that Diane Buchanan, who is here in person this morning, is going to be leading that part of the class today, and hopefully eliciting discussion from all of you, participation. So I want to, if I can figure out where I'm going from here, there we go, give you a brief overview of what we will be talking about this month. So today is January the 8th. We are talking about the problem. What is the problem? And we're going to review something that we did. Interestingly, I found my notes. It was about a year ago, or 2 years ago, excuse me. It was 2021 that we presented Through Women's Eyes. And it was a brief look at feminist theology. And there was such an interest in that. There were people who really wanted to talk more about it. It stimulated a lot of discussion. And so this is more or less a follow-up to that, and we hope an expansion of that. So, and the reason we are talking about the problem is with the hope that by naming the problem, that we can understand the problem. And if we understand the problem, that we can perhaps do away with it. It would possibly lead to its demise. I'm seeing head shakes, but we're getting better. We're improving, I will say. On January the 15th, we have the Reverend Dr. Mary Poons, one of our very own folks, that will be talking about scripture and women in the Bible and the interpretation. And that's the key word here, is interpretation. Interpretation of the Bible. Who wrote the Bible? Who decided what was included, what was not included? And so she will be talking about that on the 15th. Then on the 22nd, Mary Ann Lundy, who I only, to my sadness, I guess it's a good word for it, relatively recently came to appreciate what it was that she did for women and for her much of her career, but in particular, leading the conference of 2,000 people, which Betty Kirsting, I believe I saw her name associated with it as well, and also Mary Poons. But so we have a history in this church, and Mary Ann Lundy told me recently, we had 13 people from this church that attended the conference on reimagining women that was held in the mid-90s, 94, was it, Betty?
Yeah, but there were only, I think, only two or three of us. But the next one, there were
13. Okay. Well, the original, though, we did have representation there, which I think is commendable, certainly an amazing thing. But Mary Ann Lundy is going to be presenting on the 22nd some of the history of women's roles in our church and Christianity in the denomination. And then on the 29th, we have a group of women who are going to compose a panel, and we will be talking about what we would like to see going forward in terms of promoting the full humanity of women. Because this is something, until you wrap your head around the idea of that this is perhaps the most important thing that we can do as a church, as a denomination, is to recognize the full humanity of women, because it's only by doing that that we can move beyond where we are right now. So that's the plan. So I am going to go through this relatively quickly. This is to some extent a review for those of you who were here 2 years ago and saw this. This is going to be old stuff, and you're going to say, I've seen it before. But I do want you to tell your stories. One of the things about feminist theology is the idea of experience. We know the experience of these old guys in the Bible. What we oftentimes have not heard is women's experience. So I would like for all of you to share. And you don't have to be female in order to share. I mean, you all have mothers. Many of you have spouses of the opposite sex, and many of you have sisters, many of you have daughters. So it's important for all of us. So, hey girl, what's your problem? Well, here are some things that are the problem. We have sexism, we have patriarchy, we have androcentric authors, and that's a fancy word for men who were the ones who were the authors. Men were, in many instances, the early theologians, and they were church leaders. Now, that doesn't preclude the fact that we, in fact, have had women who have been theologians, even going back early on to the mystics. And certainly the women mystics could be considered theologians. They talked a lot about God, oftentimes through experience. And so I think we can't deny that that has been the case, but where the real problem for women has come in has been the early Christian theologians. And you'll see what I'm talking about in just a minute. And the next one is sort of a favorite of mine, language and metaphor. I think language is a huge issue because we do it every Sunday. It gets reinforced from the time you are a child. If you grew up in a church, as I did, a Presbyterian church, you said it every Sunday. He, the Lord, the King, you used male language every Sunday. And so for a child, if you ask most children here in this church or in any Presbyterian church, I would say that most of them, if you said, is God a man or a woman? Even though we as adults would say, oh, God has no gender. Well, children hear from the time they are learning what those things mean. So I think language, our perpetual use of male pronouns and male metaphors are a huge issue for the church. And imagery. I mean, you look around now. I did see this morning over here on the wall, there are women at that table, which is very commendable. I mean, that's great. And there's a woman in a little nicho back there, a Santos. So there is some, but I think especially as Protestants, we don't see much imagery of women as divine. So that's one of the things in going forward we might talk about. So here's the idea of what sexism is. It's stereotyping, but it results in prejudice, devaluation, which assumes men are more valuable than, as humans, that they are the default, if you will. And this was something very big in the early theology, that men were made in the image of God. How could you discount that? So they are the default, and women are just sort of, they were secondary. They were the help meet, if you will. That was how it was defined when way back in the creation story. So there's also, as we know, discrimination, marginalization, exclusion, invisibility, which is something that I think many people of a certain age particularly don't appreciate. Those of us who have gotten to a certain age, we probably appreciate invisibility. We know what that means. We know that if you're in a meeting, my profession was in a predominantly male profession. I know what it's like to sit at a table with a group of men, and the people who are listened to are the men. So there's an invisibility that is part of being female. And then, of course, sexism is at its core a treatment that's based on sex or gender. Then you have the term patriarchy, which I read an article in preparation for this that I thought was very interesting, because patriarchy was a big word in the 60s and 70s in gender studies. Academics used patriarchy a lot. And then it kind of fell out of favor. Patriarchy didn't seem to have the pizzazz that it did. And so what it means is cultural, that it is a cultural construct shaped by males for males. It is societal structure of male supremacy that operates at the expense of women. Power is held by males. The rules are made by males. And the adult male is the model human. Okay? Women are not considered fully human. They are defined by their relationship to males in the culture. So it's, oh yeah, Betty, she's so-and-so's wife. Oh, Susie, she is the daughter of that bigwig in the corporation. Oh, she's the mother. Oh, she's the mother. So this is what we've seen, especially in the past. So the result is oppression, injustice, and exploitation. And interestingly, with the Me Too movement, so more recently, patriarchy has become a thing again. So it's being used again. And I love this term, this snippet. It has burst its way out of the attic of half discarded notions. So patriarchy is now a thing again. So androcentric authors and theologians, beginning with the Old Testament, and we'll hear more about this from Mary, but women were, the writers were almost exclusively male. In the New Testament, there is more mention of women perhaps, but they are peripheral. And I think the important thing is that males decided what texts were included in the scriptures. So it's not as though they had a group meeting with men and women who decided what was going to be included in the scriptures. This did not happen, as probably you all know. And there are many of the scriptures that are potential scriptures which were not included. And one of the things I found just fascinating in preparing for this is the work being done by Karen King, who is at Harvard. And what she has done is look at at a lot of the Gnostic Gospels. And her particular interest is Mary Magdalene, who, if we said, and I won't embarrass anybody here, but we would say, well, was she the whore? Was she the prostitute that was somehow involved in the ministry? No, she wasn't at all. But we somehow, because there was another Mary, they were all over the place, still are, right, Mary Norris? Yeah, right. So we have Karen King is looking at Mary Magdalene and her role, and a lot of what was left out that are in the Gnostic Gospels, Mary is referred to as the apostle to the apostles. She was risen above the rest of the apostles in many of these early first century writings that the guys decided shouldn't be included. So I'm just saying that we have to be careful in our denomination where we do not believe. I think it's safe to say that we can take the scriptures literally, or that every word was ordained by, the guy in the sky with a long white beard. So that is not what we think of in this denomination, but it is yet out there. I mean, that's in the commonly what's considered. So women, when you look at women, there's in the Bible, many of them, they're seen as either virgins or whores. I mean, there's no representation of a woman. I mean, yes, we have the stories of Naomi, and we have the stories of Deborah, and we have these little bits in there, but we don't have a lot of them in terms of a well-rounded look at women. The Eve and the Jezebel tropes. I mean, we all know, we've all heard that. Oh, Eve, she let, if it weren't for her, we would be in much better place. And then the dichotomy of St. Paul. I mean, if it weren't for Paul, some people have argued, we may not have a church, but by the same token, Paul wrote some stuff that was pretty negative about women. So in case you think that, I'm some mean, strident person up here that just makes this stuff up, I want to read a couple of quotes. Don't you know you are an Eve? This is talking to women in the church about, I don't know, somewhere in the 2nd century, perhaps. Don't you know that you are the devil's gateway? And this was written by a Christian theologian who was born in 160 AD. And St. Augustine, a woman is in the image of God only when taken together with the male who is her head. As far as the man is concerned, he is by himself alone the image of God. St. Augustine also said, woman was given to man, woman who was of small intelligence and who perhaps still lies more in accordance with the prompting of the inferior flesh by the superior reason. So again, women, and this also, you can't talk about any of this without talking about sex. I mean, it is all about temptation. It's about men not being able to be upstanding when you have a temptress, as they were called. I mean, you had Eve, who was the bad person. You had these other women in the Bible who were tempting men to do bad things. So they were about the flesh. Women were about temptation and sex. Men were superior in their reasoning ability. So let's see, we have another one. The woman was created to be a man's helper specifically for the creation of children. So there you go. I mean, that was early on, and culturally, that was what women were for. They were the childbearers. They were to have the kids. This is St. Thomas Aquinas. As regards the individual nature, woman is defective and misbegotten. And then bringing it into more current times, one of the forefathers of our particular denomination, and this to an extent, you have to give John Knox a little bit of a break here. He was surrounded by women monarchs. So again, in terms of the context, he was fighting Scotland's monarch that was a woman. He was fighting England's monarch. And this comes from part of a bulletin that he wrote about women's authority, because he was speaking against it. And such be all women compared unto men of being of authority, their counsel, foolishness, and judgment, prentice, which means madness, and their judgment madness, if it be rightly considered. So there you have it. On the other hand, feminist authors have argued that it is not persuasive simply to declare that the concept of God transcends gender, which is what we do, I think, basically in our church and our denomination. We can say that God transcends gender, and therefore he is not literally male. And then you can't, what she's saying is you can't do this and then presume that all goes on as before. The problem remains that once the masculine is raised to the universal human beyond gender, the feminine alone bears the burden of sexual difference. So many feminist thinkers find that the concept of God to be humanly oppressive and religiously adulterous. So the idea is that we are not supposed to see God as anthropomorphic. The whole idea is not to see God as a human at all, whether it's male or female. But our language is so limiting in what we can do that's what that's the only way that many times that we can speak of God. And of course, the generic function of masculine nouns and pronouns leads to linguistic sexism. Well, we can't do much about the fact that our language has male and female pronouns. Now, there are some languages that do not. And I was reading an article about a religion in South America, one of the indigenous religions, where they do not have male and female first person pronouns. And so, or is it first person? Whatever. Yes, first person. Anyway, they have gender neutral pronouns, and that's how they refer to their God. Their God is gender neutral. And I wish that were the case for us, that we had that as a possibility. We also have what I think I could say to any of you is the binary oppositions. So if I said to any of you, mind, body, what would you say as far as male, female? Mind is what? Male, okay, and body is female. The same goes with reason and passion. Well, men are so reasonable. You know, women get so upset over things. They're so passionate. They get upset so easily. And so that is something that's culturally embedded. I mean, I don't know about my granddaughter. I don't know my 20-something-year-old granddaughter, if that's still the case, but it certainly was when I was in my profession. It was something that was, it was like, oh gosh, she just goes off the handle. And I think this is
somebody listened, you wouldn't have to go off the handle.
That's exactly right, Mary. So yes, Cece.
The place I see it happening today that I think is really hampering us is in this area of STEM.
Oh,
women play that part,
right.
I know a lot of men that also play that part,
Yeah.
and so I think it's a big handicap for us today in STEM, and God knows we need more women in STEM.
Yes. I don't know if you all could hear that at home. Can you hear Cece's comment about promoting STEM education for women and how that's something that we need to do going forward so that we have more women engineers, we have more, and I think it's interesting in medicine now. When I first started, I was a PhD student in the early 70s in a medical center, University of Kansas, but I was not in Lawrence. I was on the KU campus where the hospital was and where the med students, because we were the chief help as TAs. But anyway, there were many fewer women in medicine. Now it's about 50-50, or maybe more women actually than men in medicine. So I think and OBGYN is almost exclusively female, whereas it used to be completely male. So, I mean, I'm not saying that we have not made progress. We certainly have, but I agree with you, Cece. We need to promote women in the hard sciences so that we just see a more diverse group when we look out there. Hillary of Poitou, however you say that, I'm terrible in French. We must strain the poor resources of our language to express thoughts too great for words. And I think that comes from a long time ago, and it's still true today. And I think that's something that we need to really, and it's hard, it's easier just to go with what, if I can get this to, oh, there it is. It's easier to go with the status quo than to change something. We said this before, anthropomorphism is the norm. Male has become the default image, and humans, i.e. males, have created most of our God imagery. As beautiful as the Sistine Chapel is, when you look up, this is what you see. You see God draped in white, touching Adam. And I don't know, maybe there are I can't tell about the angels in the background. Maybe they're more male, female, but certainly the main character there is a guy. So before we get into the question part with Diane, I just wanted to reaffirm what feminist Christian theology is. It is theology that seeks the equality, justice, and liberation of women from what are perceived to be patriarchal or androcentric systems of power and domination that have been shaped by the church, the history of translation, and the interpretation of the Bible. And feminist theologians look to the future. They advocate for a vision of new human community based on the values of mutuality and reciprocity. So it's not like women want a lot, I don't think. I mean, they want respect, they want reciprocity, they want mutuality. And I think that we don't even consider that oftentimes within the church. So I would encourage all of you to think about some of this going forward. You want me to hand out?
Yeah, let's.
Okay.
I put them right here.
Oh, you've got it.
Oops. There you go.
Okay, thank you.
So, hi, everybody. I'm Diane. And I want to first of all thank Mary Ann because she did so much work on this class. I'm just asking the questions.
Not sure.
She did all the research, but so I want to express gratitude for that.
Yeah.
A great presentation and for all of you for coming. And I will try to, I want everybody online, this is the participation part. And really, Mary Ann and I were hoping that we can have a discussion from this point on. She's handing out a list of questions. They're going to be on the screen for those of you who are joining us via Zoom. And we really want to have some input from everybody on these questions. And I think that it will help us also sort of prepare for and think about the coming classes. So I'm sure there were lots of occasions in those slides where you all wanted to jump in and add some comments. And so now's our chance. If we need to scroll back to a screen, we could, right, Mary Ann, if somebody wanted to make comment on one of your slides. So let's look at these questions. I think it's an excellent list, but it's only a starting point. So, you might think of things that Mary Ann and I didn't think of that you want to talk about. And I hope you'll feel free to jump in and add that. Do you have a pen back there, Mary Ann? You can, in case somebody does.
That was one of the things I intended to stick in my bag this morning.
I've got one in my purse if you need it. But I was just thinking if anything comes up, that you could take notes and we can be prepared for next week. And it looks to me like, what do we have? What time do we wrap this up? Quarter after?
Until 9:30.
Oh, we can go all the way.
Well, I have a stain removal stick. Is this
So, okay, I can see some people are muted right now. We can't see on the big screen. You all who who are Zooming in. So please speak up if you would like to participate. So let's look at these questions. Marianne gave us a great background to start from. So would you consider Christianity a form of patriarchy? You think is that a true statement?
As of today, yes.
Okay,
I think we need to look at patriarchy and
that word or the
yeah,
concept?
what we assume it is, because I think if we really look very broadly, that patriarchy is more like a triangle or a pyramid. And a feminine way of doing things is more like a network or a web. Then you can look at all aspects of Christianity and raise that.
So tell us just a little bit about what you mean between the top or the triangle.
Yeah, I think it's the assumptions that on the top of a triangle or pyramid is the most significant, and everything flows from that. In a web, everyone is significant, and relationships are what you work at, so that all that wisdom can be brought forward.
I saw lots of shaking heads just in answer to the general question. Would you consider Christianity a form of patriarchy? As Marianne shared with us one example, who was it from Poitiers? Who was the woman? Hilary of Poitiers. You know, so for millennia, for hundreds and hundreds of years, there have been women out there making these statements. That if anybody here saw Linda Loving's Julian performance, Julian of Norwich is another woman who was writing and talking about the concept of God as not as a person, or using the word she sometimes to talk about God.
And speaking of Mother Jesus.
I mean, these were revolutionary ideas, of course, and I can imagine that I don't really have any examples, but there have to be women who were burned at the stake for making comments like that, for sure. Like people like I don't know. Does anybody know if Joan of Arc ever used that kind of language, or was she just burned at the stake because she was too powerful?
She was female.
She was female and asking for too much.
Well, and I think I'm going to get my tea up here. I think it's also important to know that Marianne Lundy was accused of heresy.
Oh, a lot of women were accused
Yes.
of heresy
After the
and
read.
lost their jobs.
Yes, I know.
So, I mean, this is not, it's not just what happened millennia ago.
No.
So, I mean, I think it's important to remember that part of it, that it's still going on.
In this church, it must have been like 10 or 12 years ago, serving on the administration committee, we found the women on it found we could not insert anything. And the typical of saying something and then no one paying attention, and then 10 minutes later, a man says it. And so one time we met the women. I got the women to meet prior to the meeting, and I had read where if women put their hands up for a long time, the testosterone increases. So we met. So we met before the meeting, and we raised our hands as long as we could, and then we went into the meeting, and we were much more powerful.
That is a great story. I've never heard that before, but I'll try it next time before a meeting. I love that. That's great.
Diane, when I think about patriarchy, I mean, I get the whole triangle thing and the network thing and all that stuff. I think, especially when I was working, really, I didn't like that whole network thing because you got to move on. And so, I agree that normally the head of the triangle generally is a man, and if the head of the triangle is a woman, she's seen as a bitch. And so where a man's just seen as a tough guy, So that's a problem. But to move forward, you got to get past that relational thing. And you got to have somebody that says, here's where we're going to go. And everybody needs to kind of get behind the idea because it's just more expedient, frankly, to do it that way. And so it's hard to not see that as male, I guess. I mean, well, I do see it as male generally, because most, you know, because of how we've been brought up to this point. But I don't think it's just a strictly male, ability or talent or gift.
Oh,
It's just that normally that's how it works, but sometimes I think women do tend to like fall back and let's just all be, you know, copacetic with this, and are you okay with that? If you're okay with that, and you know, if you're not okay, then I'll just do it all myself, because then I don't have to worry about it.
yeah,
So it's a problem, the whole thing of trying to reposition your thinking.
Well, I think leadership has changed in my lifetime, whereas it used to be, this is only because I know this area more than other areas. Within medicine, it was men were the captain of the ship, because the doctor was male in all likelihood way back then. And so there was that whole theory of the captain of the ship. They don't work that way at all. And they work in teams. They have maybe blue team, yellow team, whatever. They work in teams. They have physicians who may be male or female. They have nurses that may be male or female. They have phlebotomists. They have a social worker. I mean, it's all done now in a team concept. So it is in what Elise was saying, perhaps a more, if you want to give male and female attributes to something, a more female way of approaching leadership. But I know what Mary is saying too. If you sat around and waited on consensus, sometimes you just need to get it done.
no, that's true, yeah. It becomes a stopping point. And so if we think about patriarchy, and welcome, Andrew.
Oh, no.
And Brooke,
Yeah.
we're happy to see you today.
Right.
Yeah, she needs to hear this conversation, right?
I don't know that she needs to hear it. I think she runs the show.
Yeah, there's no doubt.
No patriarchy.
No, so. Humble third down here.
That's good. These are good lessons for our daughters. And that, I wanted to say, for those of you who have nieces, daughters, granddaughters, what are they saying now about patriarchy? Mary Ann commented about the fact that it sort of was a big word, and then it wasn't a big word, and now it's sort of back, and we're seeing it on the signs of protests and whatnot. But what are you hearing from younger people, men and women, in your life about this notion of patriarchy?
Okay, I don't know which question we're on. So
No, we're just kind of.
I think that the big change in male-female relationship and women's struggle for power came about because of World War II. You know, you have adding the river, because women all of a sudden were pushed into doing things that were historically male.
Yeah.
And when World War II ended, you had two things. Women who had been doing that weren't that willing to give up that power. They liked that. And then the women who didn't, went back to being the traditional wife pre-World War II, found that with the help of, washing machines, they had a lot of time on their hands. And so they had the opportunity to think about what their role was. And so I think that we need to think about feminist theology going from now on, just as we have to be able to adapt the fact that women are now taking more leadership roles. They're not willing to stay back. And I think that's being facilitated, not necessarily by my generation, but I can definitely tell you it is that way in my son's generation.
Okay.
My son helps his wife cook, they rotate off. They're willing to, to do the dishes and cooking. And his wife has a nice job. And so I think that, to me, the future looks very bright. for that, we need the feminine viewpoint in all aspects of our life, whether it's the religious side of it or the social side of it. And I think if we don't integrate them into theology going forward, we're hampering all of us the same as if we try to be female to get it into STEM.
Yeah,
I mean, it's a big price we're paying.
to cut out half of the population.
Right.
Yeah. Really good points. I can see that Alice has her has her hand up, and I'm sorry you've had it up for a while. Alice, did you want to make a point? Oops. Where'd she go? Alice. Okay, anybody else from?
Okay, I'm here now.
Go ahead and speak up. Just go ahead and speak up.
Hi, this is Jeanne Shower. I for many years taught and coached kids sports. And I did boys and girls, and sometimes they were together and sometimes they were separate. And one of the things that I talk a lot about is the tendency that girls had, particularly in basketball, to make sure that everybody got to touch the ball. So there was, for any of you who've played sports, right? There was, an opportunity to either shoot or you can pass to a friend. And I saw over and over and over again in different groups of girls that they would really try hard to make sure that someone who maybe hadn't been playing as often would get a chance to touch the ball, even though they may have had a great shot. I saw the opposite in boys' teams where a little boy would get the basketball and just put his head down and go to the other end of the court, completely surrounded by, the other team, but still take a wild shot. It was like he didn't even know that there were 5 players on the team. And I would talk to them about it. And there are pluses and minuses to that, right? In fact, one of the drills that I changed up with them is for the girls, they could only, when your team had it, you could only touch it 3 times. You could only have 3 different people touch it. You couldn't keep passing it around. Somebody had to take that, crazy shot, just to kind of get them over that feeling that everybody needs to, get a chance. For the boys, I would tell them there's no dribbling. We have to get from this end of the court to the other, and nobody can dribble. You have to look for somebody else. You have to interact with someone else. And I bring that up because in corporate America that I've worked in, still work in, I see that a lot. I see that, there's somebody mentioned, the man that speaks up in a meeting and they reiterate something that a woman has already said, but because his voice is louder or his presence is different, we tend to think of the team tended to think of them as it coming from them. And I try to be cognizant of that when I'm in meetings or when I'm in a potential leadership role, to just call that out. And one of the things that I find interesting, I think your original question was, what are you hearing from the younger people in your life? My stepdaughter is new to the corporate world. She's in her early 20s, and she brings these things up a lot. She's really confused that, that this gender stuff is still going on. And she's a little frustrated that she has to keep fighting the fight of gender equality, with somebody who's in their 30s or 40s. So it just kind of wanted to share all of that with you guys.
Thank you, Dan. Hey, Alice, are you there? Do you want to?
I'm here now.
Okay, let's hear it.
I'm just going back to the role of women in the church, in our church. And I can remember when we rebuilt our church and had to be out of our facility for 2 years, and we're over at Rosario Chapel. We did have Sheila Gustafson, as our minister. And the first Sunday that she preached at Rosario Chapel, she just gazed around the room at all the females represented in statues and pictures on the walls. And she just smiled and said, "Isn't it nice to see the feminine side of religion again?" And I think about the fact that we Protestants did away with Mary, and we did away with all saints, half of whom are approximately are female. And we lost that role of the female within the church service.
Great points. I like that story about Sheila too.
And that's why we have Mary here.
Back in that, in the.
That's why we have Mary there.
When we came to this building, the Father Jerome, yes. And that gave us a Mary.
Oh, that's so nice. Okay,
And,
I didn't know
I
that.
hate to say it was stolen, and somebody replaced it, but that we brought
Okay.
feminine back with
And
us.
so now we have her stuck in a little dark corner of this room over there. Great job.
Well, I know there are other people who want to make comments. I do want to focus I mean, it's such a huge subject, but let's narrow it back down to the church. I keep thinking of examples outside the church, but let's talk for just a minute about the question number 4. I guess I need to go on. Well, you all have this handout here, but I'm sorry, I got to get this. How do I turn the page, Mary Ann? Oh, next. Maybe this is it.
Yeah, if you
The word
click on the
next,
next,
big clue.
there
we go.
you go.
Okay, so if we look at number 4, I think that's a good thing for us to think about now. You know, what parts of the Bible do you consider the most problematic in terms of recognizing the complete humanity of women? And then some examples: doctrine of original sin and defining women's helpmate, wife, mother, virgin birth, St. Paul's writings about a woman's place in the church. I would love to hear some of your comments on that. And I don't know if y'all who have your hands up would like Nat. I can see Nat Bean. I thought there were, Judy Crawford, didn't you have your hand up, Judy?
I did, but Alice said everything more eloquently than I could. And
Awesome.
that was the topic I was going to talk about.
Thank you. How about you, Nat?
It may or may not be on this topic, but born in the mid 50s. So you're just a girl. Like if we wore pants to school, we were removed from school. The only day we were allowed to wear pants was Sadie Hawkins Day, which turned us into quote unquote, a bum, a hick, a less than. And then you go from little girl to young woman to being in for me, male dominated arena, which was the arts, to you're the model, which you unclothe yourself and we sketch you become the object. Then you move into your career, then moving into disability, which is another marginalized group, and then into elder with disability, and then into uselessness. So I think that something that's also interesting is the woman as crone, woman as the learned one, the wise woman. Thank you.
Thank you for those good comments. So does anybody want to respond to these? What parts of the Bible do you consider problematic? Are there parts that you struggle with?
Let's say something about Paul. I think he's been given, I have changed my mind about Paul through the years, just in hearing that some of the really negative things that were said supposedly by him may very well not have been by him, by the it's like they can tell by the word choices and whatever, that those were additions by someone else somewhere along the line copying the Bible who had those thoughts. And I have come around on Paul and agree that without Paul, we probably would not have Christianity today.
That was you, Alice, right?
Yes.
Okay. Great point.
I think, Diane, the thing I struggle with the most on that list
Mhm.
is virgin birth.
Yes.
Because in my opinion, if there's no virgin birth, if there's no crucifixion and there's no resurrection, then what in the hell are we worshiping? I mean, I just have a real problem with that. So, and maybe that is from my little girl Southern Baptist upbringing, but it's something that, you know, I think if you don't have that as a basis, then what do you base your faith on? I just can't quite get there yet.
Okay.
I mean, and I
These are
know
good
that a lot of
bases.
people disagree with that, but I just, that's a real problem for me. And it's,
I can give you just, I'm sure other people can speak on this, would like to speak on this too. And I can just, the example I can give you is when a personal example, asking my parents that same question when I grew up enough to think about it a little more deeply. But I grew up in a Sunday school class, you know, where there was a picture of Jesus on the wall with sort of like light brown hair and blue eyes, you know. So, you know, I grew up with that too. We all know that could not have been possible in that part of the world. So, you know, and our kids asking about this notion of virgin birth and then scoffing at that, you know, that didn't happen. That couldn't have happened. So how do we as parents, as grandparents, you know, talk to younger people about this too, and ourselves, because you're thinking about it. I think we're all thinking about it. Does anybody want to jump in and express a thought or a comment on that notion? Mary Ann?
I think it's connected to the first one on that. If it weren't for the fact that early on, women were considered to be the gateway to hell. I mean, that somehow they were responsible for the fall. Then it wouldn't matter if Mary was a virgin or not. I mean, so it's all, to me, there's that connection that somehow that had to be the explanation if we believe that women were inherently evil because they had sex.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it gets back to those things that we don't often talk about in church, which is sexuality of human beings and the idea of original sin,
Right.
then being innately connected to women.
Yes. And I think this, I don't know if it's cynical but the way I think about it too, Mary Ann, is that, you know, women were, and in some places in the world, maybe even here, once you have had sex, you're polluted. You're not, you know, you're not good anymore because you've had sex. And so Mary had to be a virgin because she would have been dirty and unacceptable if she had had sex to conceive Jesus. I don't know. Is it how do you respond to that?
I just think we need to, it dawned on me for myself, and I can't speak for you, that what is the story of the virgin birth trying to tell us?
Right.
That's what
It's a great point, Betty.
What does it say?
Yeah.
Because I think we need to go deeper than the concrete story.
And what do you think it's saying? What do you think it's saying? The story of the
I'm not
virgin
beyond that.
birth. Okay.
I'm working, but
Yeah.
but it's a deeper story.
What were you going to say?
I appreciate
Uh-huh.
Betty's comment there, because I think all of these are rational constructs trying to make sense of the divine.
Yeah.
And if we just relaxed and said there are divine moments,
That we don't have to fully understand them or be able to use words to explain them.
we don't have to create doctrines, and we don't have to have rules and make people feel bad and be excluded. What you just said, the divine experience is accessible to everyone.
Okay. Deborah Sanderson has her hand up.
Sorry, my heat just came on. So I don't know if it's really loud, but I think sometimes I struggle with I guess the definition of women as helpmate, wife, and mother, because I think that those are all really high callings and beautiful in of themselves. But I think sometimes it can feel like, I don't know, people of my age, if we've either chosen not to go that route, or it hasn't happened for whatever reason, or being a mother is a struggle. I have had friends who've, that's been a massive struggle, that we've somehow failed in life, or we haven't lived up to the expectations, and that our life is somehow far less meaningful. I find that to be a bit of a challenge, and I'm not sure why we would be seen as any less, of a woman or human than anyone else.
Very good point. And I've heard,
Think about Sarah.
yeah,
She wasn't a fulfilled person until at 90 or whatever.
yeah.
She had her, and then she was a full person, full woman.
So those are concepts that have been around for thousands of years, that feels like it's going to take thousands of years to undo what we've made progress in our lifetimes. We wasn't that long ago when people left churches because we hired female pastors. So,
Yeah.
I
That
think
happened here.
it did.
Yeah.
What year would that have been?
Well,
Was that when Sheila came?
Yeah, when Sheila came.
Okay.
And this church had a very hard time electing a woman to the session. I know my mother-in-law was the first one that was put up for it,
Okay.
but she didn't make it. She was not accepted as.
So now what year would that have been?
Oh, I was thinking that must have been in the 60s.
Okay.
And then
Yeah.
finally another woman was elected several years later.
Okay.
And when I became clerk of session here, it was very hard for some of the men to think that I could sign checks.
Okay.
It's been a different part.
So we're making progress. We are making progress.
Hi. I think, some of these things, especially defining women as helpmate, wife, and mother. As a woman, I like to be a helpmate, wife, and a good mother. And so there's nothing wrong with that.
No.
It's the other side that's not emphasized that becomes the problem, because men are also helpmates, husbands, and fathers.
Right.
And I think of I can't remember the name of the congressman who had the baby.
Oh, yeah, that was so
In
neat.
front of him,
Yeah.
the comments that he made about, sending his wife, not sending, but his wife went home to take care of the rest of the family, and that he didn't believe that she needed to be the sole person taking care of the baby because he's going to be a congressman. And I thought that was so wonderful. The way
Yeah.
he expressed
I
that.
loved it too.
And, had the baby in front of him like that. And I think there's a disservice sometimes to men when the other side is not emphasized. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. It's the one-sidedness that makes it become a problem.
That's such a great point. Thank you for making it. Yeah. What were you going to say, Elise?
Well, to that end, I mean, I think it's wonderful that men are in this room, and who knows if they're on screen. I would love in this series to have a space in which men talk about what it means to be in this ever-evolving role definition, what it was meant for them, because we're all evolving as human beings.
That's a good point. I hope that we will hear from you, men. Anytime you have anything to say. Certainly, it's a partnership. I love your points that you're making, that that maybe it hasn't always been, but I like to think that even in the olden days, it was still somewhat of a partnership that couples had. Just But I feel like, of course, we're a little more balanced now.
But oh, go ahead. Well, I just, the one couple that I can think of, and she's just, she's just wonderful. Like, and she's very bright. We all felt she should have been a mechanical engineer because that's how her mind works. I mean, she is an engineer.
Mhm.
And finally, when she was selecting a profession and she chose medicine, and I said, but McNeely, if you went into engineering, you could really help solve water issues. And that's one of the biggest issues that is in the whole world.
Mhm.
And I'll never forget, she looked at me and her big brown eyes, with just this look, and she said, but Mary, I want to look at the person I'm helping.
Oh,
And so I had no answer to that.
yeah.
And so now she's, through kind of the circuitous thing, she's in medical school now, and her husband is an engineer. And what was really neat about that, though, is when they came to visit us in the summer, and there was such an appreciation of her from Seth and what she was doing. And I said, well, I guess you guys are going to be in Dallas for a while. And he looked at McNeely and said, I think we're there for 4 years. And it just was such an affirmation of what she had decided to do and where they were going to live, and that what he was going to need to do professionally while she took care of what she needed to do. So I think
That's a nice
that
example.
was, and I think that was not something that would have really ever happened
Mhm.
to
A lot of
anyone
times in the past, yeah.
in, when I was their age. I
Okay.
mean, the woman would have just found a medical school wherever he wanted to go, or they would have not lived in the same camp or something.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have been what Seth said. And I just thought that was really a neat advancement of the marriage.
Yeah. Mary Coombs has her hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say it's way past time at this point. I will see you all next Sunday and we'll continue some of this. Obviously, this conversation is really good. And when we get into scripture and all the reasons why women have been put down in different ways in the church, we'll just continue on. Sounds good. Thank
Yeah.
you, Mary Ann and Diane.
I'm so sorry. I was not.